2:47 in the morning, rain slashing sideways like shattered glass. Derek Callahan was about to turn his beat-up sedan toward home when his headlights carved through the darkness and froze on something that didn't belong. A wheelchair, overturned at the edge of the road and crumpled inside it. A woman, dress plastered to her skin, hair streaming black rivers down her face. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't waving for help. She was just sitting there, shoulders heaving, fingers white-knuckled on the armrests, as if she'd already given up on the world finding her. Derek killed the engine and ran. The moment he reached for her, she recoiled, eyes wide, wild, terrified. Not of the storm, of him. "Please," her voice cracked like thin ice, "don't tell anyone you found me. They can't know I'm alive." A single dad with $12 in his wallet. A stranger who feared rescue more than drowning. That night, Derek Callahan carried a woman out of the rain, never suspecting she could buy every block in this city, or that her secrets would shatter everything he thought he knew. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the rain as Derek Callahan navigated the empty streets of the industrial district. His eyes burned from exhaustion, the kind that settles deep into your bones after 16 hours of work. The clock on the dashboard glowed 2:43 in the morning, and he'd been driving for Uber since his shift at the woodworking shop ended at 9. 4 more rides, he told himself. 4 more rides, and he could afford Penny's field trip next week. His 8-year-old daughter had talked about nothing else for days. The science museum, the planetarium show, the gift shop where she wanted to buy a model rocket. He couldn't disappoint her. He never could. The sedan groaned as he turned onto Miller Road, a stretch of cracked asphalt that cut through abandoned warehouses and empty lots. Nobody came here at this hour. Nobody with good intentions, anyway. Derek was about to loop back toward downtown when his headlights caught something that made his foot slam the brake so hard the seatbelt locked against his chest. At first, he thought it was debris, a shopping cart maybe, or a pile of garbage bags. But then the shape resolved into something that stopped his heart. A wheelchair, tilted sideways in the gutter, one wheel spinning slowly in the rain. And slumped inside it, a woman. Derek threw the car into park and was out the door before he could think. The rain hit him like a wall of ice, soaking through his jacket in seconds. He sprinted toward her, his work boots splashing through puddles that reflected the amber glow of his headlights. Up close, she looked worse than he'd imagined. Her dress, something expensive, silk maybe, was plastered to her skin like a second layer of pale flesh. Her hair hung in dark, wet ropes across her face, and her fingers gripped the armrests with a desperation that made his stomach turn. She wasn't moving, wasn't calling for help, just sitting there, shoulders heaving with shallow breaths, as if she'd already accepted that no one was coming. "Ma'am?" Derek crouched beside her, his voice barely audible above the hammering rain. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She flinched so violently that the wheelchair nearly tipped over completely. Her eyes snapped open, wide, wild, terrified. Not the fear of someone relieved to be found, the fear of someone who'd been caught. She tried to push herself away from him, but her arms were too weak, her body too cold. "Please," she whispered, and her voice cracked like thin ice breaking under weight. "Please don't call anyone. They can't know I'm alive." Derek stared at her. Rain streamed down his face, blurring his vision, but he could see enough. The bruises on her wrists, the raw red marks around her ankles where something had been tied, the way she kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness behind him. Every instinct screamed at him to call 911, to let the professionals handle this. But something in her eyes, something broken and desperate and achingly human, made him hesitate. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said slowly, keeping his hands visible. "My name's Derek. I'm just a guy driving home. Can you tell me your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The rain had washed away whatever makeup she'd been wearing, leaving her face pale and raw. She couldn't have been more than 30, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived through more than her years should allow. "Brooke," she finally whispered. "My name is Brooke." Derek nodded, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "Okay, Brooke. You're hypothermic, and if you stay out here much longer, you're going to die. I have a car. It's warm. I can take you somewhere safe. A hospital. A shelter. Wherever you want. But we need to move. Now." "No hospital." The words came out sharp, almost panicked. "No police. No shelters. They'll find me. They have people everywhere." Derek's mind raced. Who was they? What had this woman gotten herself into? But those questions could wait. Right now, she was shivering so hard her teeth were chattering, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that he'd seen once before, on his wife, 3 years ago, in the hours before she died. He couldn't watch someone else slip away, not when he had the power to stop it. "My apartment," he heard himself say. "It's small, and there's not much, but it's dry and warm. My daughter's asleep there. She's 8. I'm not going to do anything. I just want to help." Brooke studied him with those haunted eyes, searching for something. A lie, a trap, an ulterior motive. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because after a moment, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Derek didn't waste time. He scooped her out of the wheelchair. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones and soaking wet fabric, and carried her to the car. She tensed in his arms but didn't fight. The wheelchair he left where it was. Something told him she wouldn't need it anymore, that whatever had put her in it wasn't the kind of injury that showed up on X-rays. The drive to his apartment took 20 minutes, and neither of them spoke. Derek cranked the heat to maximum and pointed every vent toward her, watching from the corner of his eye as the color slowly returned to her cheeks. She kept her gaze fixed on the window, tracking every passing streetlight, every turn, every car that drove past. Memorizing the route, he realized, planning escape routes. Whatever she was running from had taught her to never stop looking over her shoulder. His apartment building loomed out of the darkness, a squat, 3-story structure with peeling paint and a flickering security light that had been broken for months. Not much to look at, but it was home. He carried her up 2 flights of stairs, her body still trembling against his chest, and fumbled with his keys until the door swung open. The apartment was dark except for the nightlight in the hallway, a little plastic butterfly that Penny had picked out herself. Derek set Brooke down on the couch and disappeared into the bathroom, returning with every towel he owned and a set of his own clothes. Sweatpants, a flannel shirt. They'd be huge on her, but they were dry. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, his voice low so as not to wake Penny. "Take as long as you need. I'll make some tea." When Brooke emerged 20 minutes later, she looked like a different person, still pale, still haunted, but human again. The flannel shirt hung past her knees, and she'd rolled the sweatpants up several times just to keep them on. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Derek pour hot water into 2 mismatched mugs, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then her gaze drifted past him, to the refrigerator door covered in crayon drawings and gold star homework assignments, to the tiny table with only 2 chairs, to the stack of overdue bills held down by a coffee cup that read "World's Best Daddy." "You really do have a daughter," she said, and something in her voice cracked. "Penny," Derek confirmed. She's the reason I do everything. Work 2 jobs, drive all night, skip meals when money's tight. She's my whole world. He set one of the mugs in front of her. Chamomile, the only kind he had. You don't have to tell me anything. You don't owe me explanations. But if there's anything I can do to help, I will. That's not conditional. That's just how I was raised. Brooke wrapped her hands around the mug, and Derek noticed for the first time how elegant her fingers were. No calluses, no broken nails. Hands that had never known hard labor. Hands that didn't belong in a rusted wheelchair on a road that led nowhere. I was supposed to die tonight, Brooke said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek set down his mug, his heart suddenly pounding. Someone left me there. Someone who was supposed to love me. They drugged my drink at dinner, put me in that chair, and drove me to that road. Then they just left, walked away, drove off. Her voice didn't waver. If anything, it grew stronger, as if saying the words out loud was the only way to make them real. They thought the cold would do the rest. They thought no one would find me until it was too late. She looked up at Derek, and for the first time, something like warmth flickered in her eyes. They didn't count on you. Morning came gray and quiet, the rain having softened to a steady drizzle that tapped against the windows like a patient visitor. Derek woke on the floor beside the couch, a thin blanket tangled around his legs, his back aching from the hard carpet. He'd given Brooke the couch and his only spare pillow, insisting he'd slept in worse places. Which was true. After his wife died, he'd spent 3 months on a cot in the back of his workshop because he couldn't bear to sleep in their bed alone. The couch creaked, and he looked up to find Brooke watching him, her dark hair falling across one eye. "Daddy?" A small voice came from the hallway, and Derek scrambled to his feet just as Penny appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw Brooke, her small face cycling through confusion, curiosity, and something like wonder. "Daddy, who's that lady?" Derek crouched to her level, smoothing her tangled hair. "This is Brooke. She's a friend who needed a place to stay for a little while. She was out in the rain last night, and I helped her get dry." Penny considered this with the gravity only an 8-year-old could muster. Then she walked straight to the couch and held out her hand. "I'm Penny. Do you like pancakes? Daddy makes the best pancakes." Something shifted in Brooke's expression, a softening, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. She took Penny's hand gently, as if afraid she might break it. "I love pancakes," she said, and her voice held a warmth that hadn't been there before. "I haven't had homemade pancakes in a very long time." Derek watched them together, his daughter chattering away about school and her favorite teacher and the caterpillar she'd found in the garden, and Brooke listening with an attention that seemed almost desperate, like she was memorizing every word, like she'd never been around a child before, or like she missed it more than she could say. Over the next few days, Brooke became a quiet presence in their tiny apartment. She slept on the couch, helped wash dishes, and read stories to Penny in a voice that made even the most mundane picture book sound like an epic adventure. She never complained about the cramped space, the thin walls that let in every sound from the neighbors, the hot water that ran out after 10 minutes. If anything, she seemed fascinated by it all. The way Derek stretched a single chicken breast into 3 meals. The way Penny's crayon drawings papered every available surface. The way father and daughter said grace before dinner, even when dinner was just soup from a can. "You don't have a TV," Brooke observed one evening, watching Penny do her homework at the kitchen table. Derek shrugged, not looking up from the wooden horse he was carving. A birthday present for Penny, still 2 months away. Can't afford one. And honestly, don't miss it. We read instead. Play board games. Talk. He held up the horse, examining it in the lamplight. Sometimes I think we're happier without all the noise. Brooke was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, so softly he almost missed it, I had 7 TVs in my house, 1 in every room, and I was the loneliest person alive. Derek's hand stilled on the wood. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he saw past the fear and the exhaustion to something deeper, a sadness that had nothing to do with the wheelchair or the rain or whoever had left her to die, a sadness that came from having everything and nothing at the same time. Who are you, Brooke? The question slipped out before he could stop it. She met his eyes, and he saw her wrestling with something, the urge to tell the truth warring with years of self-protection. I'm someone who forgot what matters, she said finally, until a man with $12 in his wallet reminded me. The truth came out in pieces over the following week. Her full name was Brooke Sinclair. Her father had been Harrison Sinclair, founder of Sinclair Industries, a conglomerate worth more than some small countries. He'd died 6 months ago, leaving everything to Brooke, his only legitimate heir. But Harrison had also had a son from an affair, Preston, 5 years older, raised in the shadow of the family he could never officially join. Preston had spent his entire life watching Brooke get everything he believed should have been his. The company, the mansion, the respect. And when Harrison's will confirmed that Brooke would inherit it all, something inside Preston had broken. He started small, Brooke said, her voice flat, clinical, as if she were describing someone else's life. Isolating me from friends, convincing the board I was mentally unfit, hiring doctors to prescribe me things I didn't need, things that made me foggy, compliant, easy to control. Then he put me in that wheelchair, told everyone I'd had a breakdown, that I couldn't walk, couldn't think, couldn't run the company I'd inherited. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. And I believed him. For months, I believed I was sick, because when everyone around you says you're broken, eventually you start to think they might be right. Derek listened in silence, his hands clenched so tight around his carving knife that his knuckles went white. He'd known cruelty in his life. The boss who'd fired him for taking time off when his wife was dying. The landlord who'd raised the rent 3 times in 2 years. The system that seemed designed to keep people like him perpetually struggling. But this was different. This was a kind of evil that came wrapped in family ties and legal paperwork and the polite smile of a brother who wanted you dead. Why didn't you go to the police? He asked. Brooke's smile was bitter. Because Preston owns the police. He owns the judges. He owns everyone who matters in this city. The only thing he doesn't own is me, and that's only because he thought I was dead. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Derek thought about his daughter, asleep in the next room, innocent and trusting, and completely unaware that the woman on their couch was worth more than their entire apartment building. He thought about the $12 in his wallet, the overdue bills on the counter, the second job he worked just to keep the lights on. And then he thought about the look in Brooke's eyes when she'd asked him not to call anyone. The terror, the exhaustion, the desperate, flickering hope of someone who'd stopped believing in rescue until a stranger in a beat-up sedan proved her wrong. He noticed changes in Brooke over those days. Small things at first. The way she'd started walking without holding on to walls, the color returning to her cheeks, the moments of genuine laughter that escaped before she could stop them. The drugs Preston had pumped into her system were finally clearing, and with each passing day, more of the real Brooke emerged. She was sharp, observant, had a dry wit that caught Derek off guard and made Penny giggle uncontrollably. She helped with homework, pointing out that 8-year-old math hadn't changed much since she was young, and read bedtime stories with different voices for every character. She fit into their tiny life, as if she'd always been there. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. Brooke looked at him as if no one had ever asked her that question before, as if her entire life had been a series of things done to her, decisions made for her, paths chosen by others. She was quiet for so long that Derek thought she might not answer. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and said with a quiet ferocity that transformed her entire face, "I want to take back what's mine. I want to prove I'm not broken. And I want my brother to know that he failed." Derek nodded slowly, turning her words over in his mind. "Okay," he said. "Then that's what we'll do." The plan took shape over 2 weeks of whispered conversations and late-night research. Derek's ancient laptop wheezed and groaned as Brooke navigated corporate databases, legal archives, and financial records that should have been impossible to access. But Brooke knew every password, every backdoor, every weakness in the system her father had built, because she'd helped build it. Preston had underestimated her. He'd seen the wheelchair, the medication, the vacant stare she'd learned to fake, and he'd assumed the real Brooke was gone. He was wrong. The real Brooke had been watching, waiting, gathering evidence that would destroy him. Meanwhile, Derek kept their lives as normal as possible. He went to work at the woodshop. He drove for Uber at night. He made pancakes on Saturday mornings and helped Penny with her math homework and pretended that everything was fine. But he could feel the tension building, like pressure behind a dam. Every time a car slowed in front of their building, every time someone knocked on a neighbor's door, his heart stopped for a second. Brooke had warned him that Preston would be looking, that once her brother realized the body hadn't been found, he'd tear the city apart, searching for her. They were living on borrowed time, and they both knew it. The confrontation came on a Thursday. Derek had just picked Penny up from school when he spotted the black SUV parked across the street from their building. His blood went cold. He recognized that vehicle, had seen it circling the block for the past 3 days, always keeping its distance, never quite stopping. But now it was here, parked, waiting. "Penny," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I need you to go to Mrs. Patterson's apartment. Remember the nice lady who gave you cookies last week? Go there and stay there until I come get you." Penny looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just need to talk to someone, and it might take a while. Can you be brave for me?" She nodded, clutching her backpack straps, and he watched her run into the building before turning to face the SUV. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Derek's car. His hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, his eyes the same color as Brooke's, but where hers held warmth, his held nothing. Empty, cold. The eyes of a man who saw other people as obstacles to be removed. "You must be the Good Samaritan," Preston Sinclair said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I've been looking for you." Derek didn't move, didn't flinch. He'd spent 3 years learning how to face down bigger men at the shop, how to stand his ground when suppliers tried to cheat him, how to project a confidence he didn't always feel. "I don't know what you're talking about." Preston smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Derek had ever seen. "Please, let's not play games. I know she's here. I know you've been hiding her, and I know you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." He took a step closer, his expensive shoes clicking against the wet pavement. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bring me my sister. I'm going to take her home. And you're going to forget any of this ever happened. In return, I'll make sure your daughter stays safe." The threat landed like a punch to the gut. Derek's vision went red, his hands clenched into fists. Every protective instinct in his body screamed at him to break this man's perfect jaw, to make him pay for even thinking about Penny. But before he could move, a voice cut through the rain-dampened air. "That's enough, Preston." Brooke stood in the doorway of the apartment building, her spine straight, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing with a fury that transformed her from a frightened woman into something terrifying. In her hand, she held Derek's ancient laptop. On the screen, documents scrolled past, bank records, forged signatures, testimony from the doctors Preston had bribed, photographs of the pills he'd forced down her throat. "It's over," Brooke said, her voice steady as steel. "The board of directors has copies of everything. So does the FBI. So does every major news outlet in the country. By tomorrow morning, your face will be on every screen in America, and there won't be a single person who doesn't know what you did." Preston's composure cracked. For just a moment, Derek saw the monster beneath the polished surface, the rage, the desperation, the dawning realization that he'd lost. "You can't do this," he snarled. "You're sick. You're incompetent. No one will believe you." Brooke smiled, and it was sad and triumphant and exhausted all at once. "They already do. I've spent 2 weeks rebuilding every relationship you tried to destroy. And it turns out, people remember who I was before you broke me." The police arrived 17 minutes later. Real police. Federal agents who answered to no one in this city. They put Preston in handcuffs while he screamed about lawyers and lawsuits and revenge. Brooke watched him go with an expression Derek couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe. Or grief. Or both. When the SUV finally pulled away, she turned to Derek, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing, the first one Derek had heard in weeks. "Thank you," Brooke said finally. "You saved my life, and I don't just mean that night in the rain. I mean all of it. You reminded me that there are still good people in this world, people who help strangers without expecting anything in return." Penny emerged from Mrs. Patterson's apartment moments later, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She'd watched the police cars from the window, had seen the man in the expensive suit being led away in handcuffs. But when she saw her father standing there, whole, unharmed, with Brooke beside him, she ran straight into his arms. "Daddy, I was so scared," she whispered against his chest. Derek held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small heart pounding against his. "I know, sweetheart. I know. But everything's okay now. Everything's going to be okay." Over Penny's head, he met Brooke's eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding. A promise. A recognition that whatever came next, they would face it together. That night, after Penny had finally fallen asleep, her small body curled between them on the couch, like a bridge connecting two separate worlds, Brooke told Derek the rest. The parts she'd been too afraid to share before. How Preston had started the drugs the week after their father's funeral, slipping them into her morning coffee, her evening wine, her vitamin supplements. How she'd slowly lost track of days, then weeks, then months. How she'd woken up one morning unable to feel her legs and been told it was psychosomatic, stress-related, a manifestation of her grief. How the wheelchair had become her prison long before anyone pushed her into the rain. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media interviews, and board meetings that Brooke attended with a fierce determination that made even the most skeptical executives sit up and pay attention. She'd been right. People did remember who she was before Preston's manipulation. The bright young woman who'd shadowed her father since childhood. The heir apparent who'd revolutionized their supply chain at 23. The Sinclair who actually cared about employees, communities, the people their company affected. One by one, allies emerged from the woodwork. Old friends who'd been pushed away, board members who'd suspected something was wrong, a former nurse who'd quit rather than continue administering drugs Brooke didn't need. Derek watched it all from a distance, returning to his quiet life of woodworking and Uber shifts and homework help. He'd told Brooke that she didn't owe him anything, that he'd done what any decent person would do, but she just smiled that sad, knowing smile and said nothing. He figured that was the end of it. Rich people lived in a different world after all. Their gratitude was sincere, but temporary. A warm feeling that faded once they returned to their marble hallways and chauffeured cars. He was wrong. 3 months after Preston's arrest, a certified letter arrived at Derek's apartment. He almost threw it away, assumed it was another overdue bill or a notice about rent increasing again. But Penny grabbed it first, recognizing Brooke's name on the return address, and insisted he open it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper, the kind that felt heavy in your hands, covered in elegant handwriting. "Dear Derek," it read. "I've been thinking about what you said the night we met, that you do everything for Penny, that she's your whole world. I understand that now. I understand what it means to love someone so much that you'd work yourself to the bone for them, to sacrifice sleep and comfort and dreams for their happiness." The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing a proposal that made Derek's hands shake. Brooke wanted to invest in his woodworking, not as charity, but as a business partner. She'd seen his carvings, the beautiful pieces he created late at night when he should have been sleeping, and she believed they could be something more, a workshop of his own, apprentices to train, a legacy to build. The letter ended with 3 words that blurred as tears filled his eyes. "You deserve this." A second envelope had fallen out with the letter. Derek opened it with trembling fingers and found a scholarship notice from the finest private school in the state, full ride, room and board. Everything paid, addressed to Penelope Rose Callahan. Derek sat down heavily on the couch, the papers clutched in his hands, and let himself cry for the first time since his wife's funeral. Penny climbed into his lap and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "What's wrong, Daddy? Are you sad?" He laughed through his tears, a broken, joyful sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sad. I'm just really, really grateful." He thought about everything that had led to this moment, the extra shifts, the sleepless nights, the bone-deep exhaustion that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it. And that one decision, the decision to stop on a dark road in the rain to help a stranger, when it would have been easier to drive on. 6 months later, Derek stood in the doorway of his new workshop, a converted warehouse on the edge of downtown, filled with the smell of fresh sawdust and possibility. The sign above the door read Callahan and Daughter Woodworks, painted by Penny herself in bright, uneven letters. Brooke had insisted on the name, said it was important to remember what mattered. The workshop had everything Derek had ever dreamed of, and more. Professional-grade equipment, a showroom for finished pieces, a small office where he could handle the business side of things, and in the corner, a child-sized workbench where Penny could learn the craft her father loved. The first customer walked in on opening day, an elderly woman looking for a custom rocking chair for her grandchildren. Derek had spent 3 weeks on it, carving intricate details into the armrests, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. When she saw the finished piece, tears welled in her eyes. "It's exactly what I imagined," she whispered. "Exactly what my mother used to have." Word spread. A local magazine did a feature. Orders started coming in faster than Derek could fill them. He hired 2 apprentices, young men from the neighborhood who reminded him of himself at their age, hungry for a chance to build something with their hands. A car pulled up outside, sleek, expensive, but not ostentatious. Brooke climbed out, looking nothing like the shivering woman he'd pulled from a wheelchair on a rainy night. She was radiant now, healthy and strong, her eyes bright with a purpose that suited her. She walked slowly through the workshop, running her fingers along the grain of a half-finished dining table, admiring the intricate scrollwork on a custom headboard. "You know," she said, pausing in front of the little workbench, "I never told you why I stayed that first night. Why I trusted you when I had every reason not to trust anyone." Derek looked up from the rocking chair he was sanding. "Why?" "Because of how you talked about Penny." Brooke turned to face him, her expression soft. "The way your whole face changed when you mentioned her name. The pride, the love, the fierce, unconditional dedication." She smiled, and it was the most genuine smile he'd ever seen from her. "My father looked at me like that once, before the company consumed him. Before success became more important than family. I'd forgotten what it looked like until I saw it in you." She walked toward him, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "You reminded me that love isn't something you say. It's something you do, every day, in 1,000 small ways that no one else might ever see." Derek set down his sandpaper, suddenly unable to speak. He thought about his wife, about the way she'd looked at Penny in those final weeks, memorizing every detail of their daughter's face, trying to imprint enough love to last a lifetime. He thought about the nights he'd spent collapsed on this very floor, too tired to make it to the couch, telling himself it was worth it, telling himself that someday, somehow, things would get better. "I'm not a hero," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'm just a dad, just someone trying to do right by the people he loves." Brooke reached out and squeezed his calloused hand. "That's exactly what a hero is." The door burst open, and Penny came running in, her school uniform rumpled, her backpack bouncing wildly. "Daddy! Miss Brooke!" She launched herself at Derek, who caught her with practiced ease. "Guess what? I got an A on my science project, the one about the stars." Derek lifted her high, spinning her in a circle while she shrieked with laughter. Over her shoulder, he caught Brooke's eye and saw something there, something that went beyond gratitude, beyond partnership, beyond anything he had words for. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of promise. A single dad, a woman who'd lost everything and found herself. And a little girl who believed in both of them with a faith that could move mountains. Later that evening, as the sun set orange and gold over the city, Derek found himself standing at the window of his workshop, watching Penny and Brooke plant flowers in the small garden out front. Brooke had insisted on marigolds, said they reminded her of her mother, of simpler times, of a childhood before everything got complicated. Penny was chattering away about something, her hands covered in dirt, and Brooke was listening with that same desperate attention she'd shown since the first morning. Like every word was precious, like she'd spent so long being alone that she didn't want to miss a single moment of connection. Derek thought about the night he'd found her, the rain, the wheelchair. The terror in her eyes when she'd begged him not to call anyone. He thought about his own fear, the $12 in his wallet, the mountain of bills on his counter, the impossible weight of raising a child alone. And he thought about what his wife had told him in those final hours, when the morphine made her honest and the approaching end made everything crystal clear. "Take care of our girl," she'd whispered, "and don't forget to let people take care of you too. You can't pour from an empty cup, Derek. Promise me you'll remember that." He'd tried. God, how he'd tried. And somehow, against all odds, the universe had sent him someone who needed help as much as he did. Someone whose broken pieces fit against his in ways neither of them could have predicted. He didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if Brooke would stay, or if she'd eventually return to the glass towers and board meetings that were her birthright. Didn't know if this strange, beautiful family they'd assembled would last a month or a lifetime. But standing there in the fading light, watching his daughter laugh and his unlikely friend smile, Derek Callahan knew one thing for certain. He'd stopped on that road. In the rain. In the dark. When every logical part of his brain had told him to keep driving, to mind his own business, to protect himself and his daughter from whatever trouble that wheelchair might bring, he'd stopped anyway, because that's who he was, because that's who his wife had loved, because that's the kind of man he wanted Penny to grow up admiring. And that single choice, that moment of ordinary decency on an extraordinary night, had changed everything. Not just for Brooke, for all of them. The truth that had stunned Derek Callahan wasn't about money or power or the twisted machinations of a jealous brother. It was simpler than that, and infinitely more profound. Sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to stop on a dark road in the rain, the universe has a way of rewriting your entire story.